Hi everyone, so as a little bit of a prologue to my election prediction video, I just want to give a little bit of an overview for the race. So 24 Democrats incumbents are up. They only need to gain 2 seats to win the Senate, but most pollsters, most pundits are writing off the Democrats' chances because most of these states are Republican states, heavy Trump states, such as North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia, Montana, that Democrats are fighting to be reelected in. So that's going to be a big chance to hold on to their seats in red states, plus pick up seats. So that's going to be a big challenge for Democrats, but yet Democrats are fighting for hope, and I'm going to give you my prediction. Hi everyone. So today we have the midterm election prediction for the U.S. Senate in 2018. This is probably going to be my first of many predictions I'm going to be updating frequently up until the midterms. So let's get straight into it. So California, 2 Democrats, Kevin De Leon and Dianne Feinstein, are both running against each other. So it's going to be a Democratic seat. It's impossible for the Republican to win in that state. Washington, pretty safe. Maria Cantwell is relatively popular, and Washington is a safe blue state, so that's going to stay in her column. New York is going to say Democratic. Vermont, Bernie Sanders, incredibly popular. He'll most likely be reelected and caucus for the Democrats. Maine, Angus King is pretty popular. He was likely to win re-election, as well as Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and New Mexico. These are relatively safe Democratic states, Democratic-based states, and they're all incumbents are mostly running for re-election. So with that advantage, they're pretty popular right now. Likely to be a blue surge, if not a wave, in November. So you can see that they will definitely be re-elected, or very highly likely. Now we go into the Rust Belt. We see, where does this go? Because Donald Trump won these states in 2016. So are these incumbents vulnerable in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania? Well, Michigan and Pennsylvania are both pretty safely Democratic. Both Debbie Stabenow and Bob Casey have a large leads in the polls. They're popular. They're longtime incumbents. They're likely to win re-election. Wisconsin is a little bit of a different story. But I do see that still going for Tammy Baldwin. This is her first term, but it's her first term. She's the incumbent, so she's still a little bit unknown in Wisconsin because it is her first term. And there has been polling that has shown this race is a little bit more competitive between Baldwin and Vukumer. So in that state, I can see that potentially being competitive for the Republicans, but I see that likely, since it will be a little bit of a blue surge, a lot of Democrats are going to come out to vote. I see Wisconsin voting for Tammy Baldwin. Minnesota and the special election in Minnesota for former Senator Al Franken's seat, I see them both pretty easily going for the Democrats. If you look at the latest polls, Klobuchar's up 15, Smith is up 9. It's a relatively Democratic state. Hasn't voted for a Republican since the 1970s, so this is likely to stay in the Democratic column for the incumbents. It did vote narrowly for Clinton in 2016, but you will see a lot of the energy will be on the Democratic side this time. So I see them both being reelected. Of course, Hawaii, I missed that. Safe Democratic-based state. If you go to some of the Republican-based states, Utah, Wyoming, Nebraska, I don't really see these states really voting for the Republicans at all. You know, Mitt Romney's very popular among Mormons. Utah, he's likely to be reelected. Wyoming, probably one of the most Republican states in the nation. there's almost no circumstance where he would lose. Um, Now we go into Mississippi also for Raja Ricker. He's the incumbent, relatively popular. Um, I see him being reelected. The special election, however, might be a little bit competitive. However, former Senator Thad Cochran's seat, but likely I would say it would vote for the Republicans, because this is a pretty Democratic state. Unless there was Mississippi is less Democratic than Alabama, but unless a big scandal comes out in Mississippi with one of the candidates, to see the incumbent being reelected, the only chance if I see Mississippi going, if the incumbent's current incumbent senator that's been appointed to replace Ed Cochran loses her primary, I could see maybe the Democrat picking up that seat. So now we're going to be heading into more competitive races. Most of the competitive races on this list we have are Democratic seats. These are seats, a lot of red states that Trump won by big margins. That in 2016, these are Senate races that came out of 2012. President Obama was reelected, and Democrats were relatively popular in that election. So that explains why there's a lot of blue seats up. Now, if we look at the Senate seats, Virginia also. This is relatively a swing state, but it's the demographic trends in Virginia have been going towards the Democrats. Tim Kaine greatly increased his name recognition in his home state by being the vice presidential candidate for Hillary Clinton. I see him being reelected. He has a pretty large lead in the polls against Corey Stewart. We go back now to the rest of these states. Most of these are Democratic states, like I said, but there's 4 Republican incumbents that are vulnerable. You have Nevada, Arizona, Texas, and Tennessee. Let's first start with Texas. I'm going to say that it's leaning for Ted Cruz at this point. If I had to bet, Ted Cruz would win, but Beto O'Rourke is coming from behind. He's got a lot of media attention. He's got a lot of grassroots energy support behind him in Texas. Ted Cruz is very unlikable, although he has a relatively high approval rating in Texas. Beto O'Rourke has a similar approval rating, except that less people know about him. So as we get closer to election day, Beto O'Rourke might have much more favorability ratings than Ted Cruz. If we look at, so that is leaning only because it's Texas. But if we look at some of the polling data out for Texas, the last poll was taken at the end of August. That showed Cruz having a 1-point lead. Before that, Cruz having a 4-point lead in an NBC News Marist poll. So that I trust the NBC poll better because it's closer to 50%. That's less undecided, but this and has a larger sample size. But this is not good for an incumbent in Texas, having less than a 10-point margin. You could talk about having the demographic trends in the state is close inching towards being a swing state, but Beto O'Rourke has a chance in here. He's raising more money than Ted Cruz. People from all across the country are donating to O'Rourke's campaign, so he has a chance in Texas. But just because it's Texas, just because Ted Cruz is a Republican, I see him narrowly edging out that as of now. Unless there's more polling data comes out, I could see this changing. We head to the rest of the states now. I see West Virginia is pretty likely to vote for Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin, relatively popular senator. He was governor, then he became senator in the state of West Virginia. You'll see him. He's been up in the polls. You'll likely see him being reelected. So Joe Manchin will be reelected. If we go to Indiana, I do see this is more of a toss up, but I could see Joe Donnelly getting reelected in the state. Indiana and North Dakota are peculiar cases. They do tend to vote Republican, but for unique, they tend to vote for the candidate. If for a unique candidate, they can vote. They vote Democratic. For example, Indiana voted Democrat in 2008 for Barack Obama, the presidential race. Elected Joe Donnelly in 2012. There was a little bit some circumstances regarding his opponent, but still, Joe Donnelly is relatively popular in his state. And some of the polling data. The last, the most recent poll by Fox News showed Braun as a 2-point lead. But if you look at the other recent polls, you have the NBC News Marist showing him has a 6-point lead. A Republican poll by the has actually shown him with a 12-point lead. So you can see here the polling data that has more less undecideds showing a Donnelly lead, where the ones that are more in the lower 40s show a Braun lead. So I can see this race going by maybe, I think the Donnelly numbers from NBC News may be a little bit more accurate. Maybe a 6-point lead, because if you see the undecideds come for Donnelly at the last minute, I can see Donnelly winning re-election in that state. North Dakota, I mentioned before, votes for different candidates, is another situation. However, both Heidi Heitkamp and Mike Braun and Kevin Kramer are relatively popular, but they're both relatively popular with similar approval ratings. And so, just by virtue that Kevin Kramer is a Republican, this is a heavily Republican state, I see Kevin Kramer edging out this race very narrowly. If you look at the polling data in the state, we got a recent poll here with Kramer up with a 4-point lead. The previous poll showed Kramer with a 4-point lead, the exact margin replicated by a different pollster. And the only thing that showed Heitkamp with the lead was back in February, and that had a low sample size with a lot of undecided. So I see Kevin Kramer narrowly edging out this Senate race. So this is a gain for the Republicans. But I wouldn't be surprised if Heitkamp edges is out in the end. We'll have to see with the new polling data where the undecideds go, because the race is under 50% for either candidate. If we go to Montana, I say this is kind of leaning a little bit towards Jon Tester. The polling data last poll was Tester at +8 in Montana. He's relatively popular here. They have a Democratic governor currently. He's likely to win re-election. Sherrod Brown, this is in Ohio. He's likely to win re-election as well. He's relatively popular in the state. He's also very good. He has very good appeal to white working class voters. He was for Trump's tariffs, and he can really speak to the Trump Democrats in Ohio and win re-election. He's relatively popular, and I think he'll win re-election by a pretty decent margin. Now, these states are a little bit more tougher to call that are left. The first one I'm going to say is Florida. I think Bill Nelson's going to win re-election. This was relatively Bill Nelson had a pretty comfortable lead in the Senate race until Rick Scott, the current governor of Florida, was retiring in 2018 as governor, announced his candidacy. But I think a big boost to Bill Nelson is Andrew Gillum. If we look at some of the polls for the Florida governor's race, you see Gillum is having a 6-point lead, and this is by Rasmussen, which is usually has a tilt towards the Republicans. So if they're showing a 6-point lead for Gillum, this could be a big win for Gillum. You have Gillum in a previous Survey USA as a 4-point lead. He's leading in every poll. Now on Nelson, on the other hand, his last poll was Nelson was up by 1, but again, this is Rasmussen. So this is a Republican pollster. Previous poll like that was done relatively right before that, Scott +2. So this is a toss-up race in the Senate race. But Andrew Gillum, he can get a lot of his progressive base out to vote for him. He can get a lot of African American voters, minority voters to come out to vote for him, and this will kind of drive the turnout for Bill Nelson as well. on the ticket. So I could see Nelson edging that out, and I think he's going to win by a smaller margin that Gillum's going to be elected governor as. If we go to Missouri, I see this narrowly voting for Heidi Heitkamp. This is really a race that can go either way. This is a toss-up race. But if you look at some of the polling data, when in Missouri, sorry. Josh Hawley has about a small edge in the average of polls, but the last three polls that have been taken have all been showing Hawley and McCaskill as a tie. Now, and the last one that showed Hawley as a lead +2 was a Republican pollster, so this race can go either way. But Claire McCaskill has won in a wave election. She won in 2006. This is kind of similar case to Indiana, but Ms. Caskill won, but with the Republican candidate having controversy in 2012. But I can see her just narrowly winning it because it's a tied race right now because of the incumbent, because of trends that are more Democrat-based voters going to come out. I see Claire McCaskill winning re-election in Missouri. But I wouldn't count Josh Hawley out. It's really a 50-50 chance here. Nevada, I see a gain for the Democrats here in Nevada. Jackie Rosen, she's running against Dean Heller, who's the incumbent. Dean Heller's approval rating is not the greatest, and he was narrowly elected in 2012. He is like, I can see this race being a good pickup for Jackie Rosen. Latest poll showed her up by 1, so it is relatively a close race, but this is the only state that Hillary Clinton, it's up for the Senate race, that Hillary Clinton won, but there's a Republican incumbent, so the Democrats are definitely targeting this state a lot. Now, Arizona and Tennessee. These are two places where Democrats are looking for pickups. Now, I see Arizona voting for Kyrsten Sinema. Why? Well, latest poll showed her up by 3. This is Fox News polls. It tends to lean a little bit Republican, but their polling data is usually pretty good. Last two polls show McSally had a lead, but all the other previous polls that has been taken have showed Sinema had big leads. So these are the first polls since the primary. The 3 polls at the top has been the first poll since the primary. So McSally, I would be much more confident to call this race for Sinema a couple weeks ago, but now this is McSally's polling data. She's up, and she's also close to the 50% mark here. So I can see this voting either way. And I don't really see a lot of the progressive base wanting to back Sinema, because she's a relatively conservative Democrat. And this race, I think I could see Kyrsten Sinema narrowly edging out, only because you'll see a Hispanic vote will be up in 2018 in terms of turnout because of the DACA issue, because of the children being held at the border. I can see Sinema maybe edging out because of that reason. The latest poll showed her up, and so I could see that. Tennessee, I could see going either way. Phil Bredesen, very popular incumbent when he was governor, and he won by 70% in his re-election bid. But the polling data has been pretty tight. In the latest poll, you have Marsha Blackburn up by 3. But the previous poll, Bredesen was up by 2. So this is a toss-up race. It could go either way, but I can see Tennessee voting for Phil Bredesen. Why? Because if you actually look at the 2006 Senate race in Tennessee, it was actually relatively very close. So this is gonna most likely gonna be a blue wave election again, and Phil Bredesen might get similar margins, and plus he might expand on that win in Tennessee in 2006 because he was a former governor. Has a lot of name recognition, and it is relatively popular. So if we had, let me show you that Senate race. You see, Bob Corker, who's the incumbent, is not running for re-election. Only got 50.7% of the vote, about a 2.7 margin of victory. So Tennessee in a blue wave election, I think, could be picked up by the Democrats. We see that in the polling data. We see that by popular former governor. We'll see how that plays out. It might, if there's a lot more polling data comes up from Marsha Blackburn in the next coming days, I'll probably instantly change my prediction. But as of now, I see Phil Bredesen winning in that race. So, in a bold prediction, I predict the Democrats are going to gain the Senate in the 2018 midterms. They're going to have a net gain of 2 seats. They're going to pick up Nevada, Arizona, and Tennessee, but they're going to lose North Dakota to Kramer. So that's a net gain of 2, like I said. And so that would pretty much reverse the composition of the Senate. So there was used to be 49 Democrats, 51 Republicans. The Democrats would reverse that, 51 Democrats and 49 Republicans. That's likely to what I see right now being the Senate outcome. A lot of pollsters have not been giving the Democrats a chance on the Senate race. I think the Democrats are a little bit underestimated in that by most pundits in their chances of regaining the Senate, because even though a lot of Trump states are out for a re-election in Democratic incumbents, those Democratic incumbents are pretty popular and are relatively have good approval ratings. So we'll see what happens with the new polling data that comes in for the next couple of weeks, and I'll definitely update my prediction. So stay tuned, consider subscribing to see those updates, and thank you for watching.